ฮัลโหล
สวัสดีค่ะอาจารย์ได้ยินไหมคะ
ได้ยินครับอาจารย์คุณากรก็เข้า
สวัสดีครับสวัส
ครับ
ดีครับ
อาจารย์
สวัสดีครับ
ครับเดี๋ยวทั้งนั้น so good afternoon everybody today we have an afternoon lecture that we are lucky to have and with us today and speaking about kind of his background. We have Dr. Kunakon. Dr. Kunakon originally graduated from Chulalongkorn Mahavidyalai, and then he went off and did internal medicine in the United States. And after that, did neuroradiology, and then subsequently did sounds like interventional neuroradiology fellowship, and then basically has developed a startup company. Um, and what he has spoken to us about before is it is devices used in the um, the neurovascular system. And today he's going to talk a little bit about that and his experience with that. So without further ado, I'd like to give a warm welcome to Dr. Kunakon, and thank you very much for um, spending time with us. We know that this is in the middle of the morning for you because you're in the U.S. right now, correct?
Yeah, luckily I'm in the Pacific time zone, so it's not too bad.
Okay.
So, but thank you so much, for having me today. So, you want this in English, correct? Okay, so yeah, I'm just gonna try to share my screen here. Yeah, so thank you, CICM, for inviting me today. Yeah, so I'll just, if you have any other questions, just feel free to interrupt me anytime. So, anyways, like today, I just to, give a little bit of talk on, on my own perspective in how to, create any medical device innovation, that could have an impact on a global scale. Are you guys able to see my screen okay? All right, sorry. Okay, so yeah, there you go. Yeah, so just to kind of briefly add, so my experience in medical innovation, obviously, it came, during training, and apparently, again, as Dr. Dave has already gave some introduction, so just to for you to get an idea, on the perspective on how this may be done. So, I did medical school, in Thailand, at Chulalongkorn University, I'm a U.S. citizen by birth. Um, and, and I decided after medical school, I wanted to go back, and pursue, training in the U.S. So, I did like internal medicine and neurology and, stroke, fellowship, and also after that, I did like interventional, neurology, which is pretty much, very similar to, our counterpart, interventional cardiology, in cardiology where um, their most treated disease is for coronary artery disease. So for us, stroke, is what we treat the most. Very similarly, I mean, these are both cardiovascular disease, related to a blockage or any damage to a blood vessel, for us to treat. So anyway, so in that sense, as you may know, a lot of you probably have heard of advancement in cardiology, in treatment in heart disease, especially coronary artery disease. When we're talking about coronary artery disease, we're talking about blockage, in a blood vessel, caused by whatever source, and you open it up with, stents or whatever balloon technique that you may have heard of. However, you may have not heard of treatment for stroke so much, even though it is pretty much the same idea, right? Because stroke is pretty much a disease that's caused by a blockage in the brain vessel, and very similarly to the coronary artery disease, but the cause is a little different because majority of the cause of the blockage in the brain stroke is related to blood clot, most likely. So in that case, since because neurology, like development in any innovation has always lagged behind cardiology, and there's probably a very good reason for it because in general, I mean, the brain, and the neurology field itself, is lagging behind because the basic science behind neurology is lagging behind. We don't know as much as anatomy, or what the brain does as much as what people know, about what the heart does. So in that case, it makes sense that innovation would lag behind, but it doesn't mean it's not there. So it's coming. A lot of innovation in neurology is coming right now. A lot of innovation in cardiology is actually setting like a good ground for us, to go in the same direction. And again, a lot of you, and there's a good reason why a lot of you have not heard of how do we treat stroke and how do we, what kind of innovation is there to treat stroke, but you all have heard about stents or coronary artery disease treatment with stent because they actually lead us by about 15 years. So, and again, the innovation for treatment of stroke is literally within not even a decade old. So I'm just going to talk in a little bit about that and how, technically a person, such as us, and yourself and everyone in our field, can actually move on forward to becoming, and be a part of, like, the innovation, for medical treatment. So I'm just gonna move on and just give you and again, like, if you have any questions, just let me know at any time. So just general agenda for today. I'm just gonna very briefly, I'll let you know about the medical technology industry, like how we come into the innovation, like how like a medical technology innovation and a startup is started, and then last thing, I want to talk a little bit about how this can be more developed in the emerging markets. So anyway, so we'll start off, again, in leading towards, an innovation phase. Again, like it doesn't, you are like a doctor, like, I mean, so technically everyone is trained, to know clinically you're supposed to be done after you finish school to be able to see patients and know, like, how to treat patients clinically, right? So that's our main thing, right? But again, like being a physician, there's multiple roles that you can play. So one of the main role that everyone is probably most familiar with and most likely going to take is becoming the role of a clinician, right? So being a physician, like who eventually becomes a clinician, like you see and you treat patients, and your expertise is in knowing about the disease itself, right? So anyway, so in knowing the disease, like wants to lead to a little bit more than that, sometimes because when you want to do some kind of innovation, you want to know the problem very well. And that's where we are standing in, we are literally standing in the problem like every day because we know what is the disease, that we're taking care of. We know what is the current treatment paradigm. Like for example, when I started my training for neurology, stroke treatment, there was nothing, right? Literally, there was there was like thrombolytic medication, which in the case of severe stroke only work in about 5 to 10%. So basically, you have better chance of really not doing anything, really, right? So in that case, it doesn't mean like, and again, 5 to 10% is very abysmal, like percentage of like working. So in that case, it means that very, very clearly you need some kind of innovation because if you have those kind of severe stroke and you give medication and you only have like a 10% chance of surviving it or even, having a good outcome from it, then what's the point, right? So it means that at that point you are deep within the problem itself, but once you look in a bigger aspect, in terms of being a physician itself, the other role that we can play is actually being an epidemiologist, right? So a physician who are trained, well, we have some training in epidemiology and biostatistic, like in our class, so that we know, like the basics of it. But to be able to train more in that, there are other advanced degree, or even sometimes, like you can become an epidemiology expert, like and a physician, um, by self-study, right? So in this case, like if we look at the epidemiology of stroke, first, so we're a physician and we're a clinician, we know that okay, stroke is a deadly disease. People who have it, about 40 to 50%, have bad outcomes if you don't treat it. And if you don't, and if they don't have bad outcome, which includes either you die or you have severe disability, and that's like the leading cause of death, in the world. And when you call like cardiovascular disease in general, so now you know about the disease itself, but once you look in the epidemiology aspect, you see that okay, so it's not only just a bad disease, it's actually affecting almost 25% of the population. So that's a statistic. 1 in 4 people at some point will have a stroke. So that's pretty bad, right? So now, we know that disease is bad because we learn about it in school. We become a clinician, we see stroke patient. But now, once you look at it in the epidemiology standpoint, and this is kind of where it tells you about the market as well, right? There's an innovation needed, but you also, the market is big. Why? Because cardiovascular disease is huge, right? As you can see here, ischemic heart disease and stroke, they're both part of cardiovascular disease, and they account for the most cause of death for as long as I can remember, right? So as of now, it's still the most common cause of death. By the way, right now in Thailand, stroke is actually has been, in some years, the number one cause of death in Thailand. Only second, or sometime, it wins to cancer. And you might wonder why, like what happened to coronary artery disease. So ischemic heart disease or coronary artery disease, why are we doing a good job, and it's going, is it because our population? Not really. We actually also have a lot of ischemic heart disease, but actually since because the innovation for ischemic heart disease is so well treated, that people in Thailand is getting so well treated, especially at Thammasat University right now. It's a very big ischemic heart disease institute, and you do a lot of coronary artery disease treatment. That is why a lot of Thai people no longer die from ischemic heart disease, but they die of stroke instead, because we don't have this new innovation. So that kind of gives you a general idea of how you want to kind of jump into this in the first place, because you want to know that, okay, the problem is there, and the problem is there, how big is it? Okay, and the problem is there and it's very big, and it's also very big in terms of number and very big in terms of impact, right? So in this case, that's why that's where most of the innovations start, especially coming from physician is themselves. Either you are a clinician or you're an epidemiologist or you're a professor or whatever you do. Eventually, you are like the person who knows the problem the most, and that's kind of how innovation starts. So just kind of moving on from there, I'm just going to give you a little bit of idea about stroke in general. And the reason why I want to talk about this is because, this is, just think of this as a case study of how an innovation start, but I'm just using the case study as something I'm more familiar with, which is, cardiovascular disease, especially the stroke, right? So in this case, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about the actual number. So again, I touched on this, very briefly. In Thailand, we have about 250,000 to 300,000 strokes a year. Globally, there's about 17 million. So now we see like the number is massive, right? And then if you don't get treatment, a majority of the patient will end up either dying or having permanent disability. And permanent disability in this case, it depends on where the location of stroke is, but more likely the patient have a stroke on the dominant side, which controls your speech, your whole one side of the body movement. And again, if you cannot move and you cannot speak, a lot of people think that's actually worse than death, right? So in this case, it means that stroke is has is one of like the most debilitating disease in the world. So just to kind of highlight a little bit on the actual number of the patient being treated. Okay, so again, just to kind of go over the detail, I touched briefly that there are new treatments out there, right? So now, like, we're not in like the dark age anymore. We actually have some treatment, even though it's very new. And new, I'm talking about 5, 6, 7 years new, right? So nowadays, people may not die of stroke anymore because of the new treatment. And again, with the new treatment, I'll talk to you about it in a little bit. But again, as you see the number here, 17 million globally, 300,000 in Thailand, 1.1 million in US, And again, so now we talk about this, then we talk about, okay, so now there's a new life-saving treatment out there to treat stroke. How many people are actually getting it? Globally, 97%, just again, you may not be able to read this very well, 97% of the patient is not getting it. Okay, so this is really bad, right? It's not, they are not getting treatment, which is life-saving, 97%. Right? And if you can see here, even the best in the world, which is usually either the US, it's like right now, I think Australia beat it by a little bit, but again, it's still roughly 40% or less, right? And that's the best in the world. And now you can guess countries who are not the best in the world, especially like Thailand, we're only doing 2.5%. What happened to the rest of the patient? Like I mentioned to you, majority of them either die or they are severely disabled. And that's why stroke is the number one cause of death in Thailand. And I'm not even counting the cause of disability. And that's also number one. All right. So what it means here is that it's very clear that, okay, so there are certain innovation that is needed here. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the innovation that's kind of there right now. So luckily, because there's no treatment for stroke apart from just medication that I mentioned to you earlier, but in 2015, there's a new treatment device that has been developed by UCLA, the place where I trained, and and especially like during the time while I was in training at UCLA, 2015, they developed a treatment very similar to coronary artery disease, where they figure out that hey, you can open a blood vessel that is blocked, in a heart disease. Why can't you do the same thing in the brain? Like why are you just giving medication? It makes sense, right? So that's why at that point, they developed uh, a device, which is called a stent retriever, which is basically very similar to a heart stent, but it's like a stent that can be retrieved, and also an aspiration system which can suck out the blood clot. And these two systems combined um, can help remove blood clot from the brain. And again, I mean, this is a very general idea that you reach, and then like just imagine this is the artery in the brain. If you guys are already far out in your clinical classes, let's say this is mostly middle cerebral artery, and these are the bifurcation. So this middle cerebral artery is the most common place where you have a stroke, and also the most severe stroke happens here, right? So what happened here is that you deploy something called a stent retriever, which basically can grab hold of this clot and you drag it out of your body. And the access path can be from your groin vessel, where you can use a fluoroscopy guided the whole way, all the way to the brain, very similar to how you put a stent in the heart. Or you can go through the other big vessel, like, in the arm itself, which is actually one of my specialty. And um, and either way, you want to navigate all the way to the brain, remove the blood clot out, and then hopefully, it opens the blood flow. And again, I told you earlier, in this case, if you have a big blood clot like this that blocks the whole middle cerebral artery, what happened is that you can only open these vessels about 10-15% of the time, maximal, 20 with medication if you're lucky, right? But with this new devices, you can open it about 90% of the time. So as you can see here, 10% compared to 90% is a no-brainer, right? And again, for sure, and again, with this innovation that came out, it's actually one of the most effective innovation that was ever created for any treatment in all of mankind. It is that important. Just by just certainly knowing what the problem is, knowing how big it is, knowing what kind of treatment is kind of out there for other disease, and try to implement it to this. And this is how much an impact can become. This treatment alone basically changed the whole paradigm for treatment of stroke. And right now, there's so many more people that needs to be trained in the field of interventional neurology, because at that point, we don't have any better methods, right? And again, I'm pretty sure, like, when Dr. Tip was training in the US, there was no such treatment, right? Because again, this treatment only started when I started training, in 2014 and 15. Okay. um so anyway, so this is the innovation that was started. um by the way, this treatment is actually started, and once it was, it actually became, one of the greatest innovation. And then right now, like the person who owns these stent retriever patents are Medtronic and Stryker, for the first generation. And again, Medtronic, if you know, is actually the like the Medtronic is the largest medical device company in the world, and is it like a U.S. owned company? Okay. All right. So I'm just gonna move on real quick. So anyway, so this is generally just to kind of show you how this works. So a stent retriever, like I mentioned, we use fluoroscopy guided, radiological technique that may have learned a lot in your class already. Just remember this picture is always on the board. Okay. So this is an angiographic image. The middle cerebral artery, as you can see here, is supposed to come out laterally, and is not here anymore because it's gone, because there's a vessel that's blocked right here. You see it, it's supposed to look like this, right? So what happened here is that there's a blood clot here, even though you can't see it, but like the vessel that's supposed to be there is not there. So what happened is that you insert the stent retriever that I mentioned to you, and which is like a stent, and it went in and opened up, and then you pull out the blood clot that looks like this, and then you open up the blood vessel. So now there's a complete flow. If you don't do that, then you end up with a stroke like this. And this is a picture of the damage or an infarcted brain, and you cannot recover from that. So now you got to rely on other technology or innovation that we don't have yet, like, for example, stem cell or anything else for regeneration that is being that's actually something that is part of my research project right now. But again, that's not one of the innovation that has shown to work yet, especially in stem cell for stroke. It's work in rats, but not human. Okay, so anyway, so now you get the point. So now we have this kind of innovation out there. Now we want to see that, okay, so we have innovation. There is a lot more innovation that is needed in that, and then you start seeing a problem, and when you see a problem, you want to see how big the problem is, big in terms of quantity, and also like the impact that it portrays on the patient. Because if it's like if it causes a large impact on the patient quality of life, then obviously the innovation might be necessary. And also, if the disease is very common, the market size is already big, so then the impact is is the quality itself, times like the quantity of the patient who actually has it, right? Okay, so this is in general. So what we do here is that, right now, even with this, generation, treatment, again, it is 90% effective. But even with that, this treatment, you might wonder, going back to the same slide here, of why a lot of patients aren't being treated, even though that you have such an awesome treatment now. And one of the main reasons why is because these innovation, again, they don't come cheap, right? They don't come cheap, meaning that because there's a lot of R&D money and a lot of training, especially for the research purposes that went into it. So obviously, like these devices cost a lot, right? And when they cost a lot, since because they're a new technology, and again, like I mentioned to you, all these companies that owns these patents are U.S. company, right? And when they are U.S. company, the cost of the devices usually are based upon the affordability of that market, right? And especially the main market, if it's the U.S., their affordability is one of the highest in the world. I mean, by the way, like, the physician in the U.S. and also the affordability in the U.S. are actually one of the highest in the world. Thus, the cost, that is set in the U.S. obviously is going to be one of the highest, meaning that every other country, even though they might have a slight discount or whatever discount they may give you, it is still exponentially high compared to something that you can afford. And I can give you a general idea of how much the stent retriever cost, or the system costs in time. It is very easy that I can, for one single patient for one time, and especially in the disease that is so common, that you pay, just for the device itself, upwards of $15,000. Which in this case, you just like imagine just a round number, maybe 500,000 baht per patient, and this is not a rare disease. This is one of the most common diseases in the world, and you have to pay $500,000. 500,000 baht per patient. That's not going to be possible for Thailand, right? So obviously, that's one of the reasons why the number is so low, right? And again, there's been a lot of effort to try to kind of reduce the cost. But again, in general, if the price and the economy, and the innovation is very different. That is why, sometimes, like the innovation to reduce costs is also, something that is, really highly sought after in nowadays, in the new innovation field. It doesn't have to be new. It can just be something that you can make that works about the same, but it can be made in a much cheaper way. Because again, that also works. That helps with the economy, and that's also a big problem that has a big impact, quantity, and also quality, right? So again, innovation plays in a different role. Okay, so just to give you a general idea, in an introduction to like medical technology startup itself, so just a general idea of like how how a technology startup can start. So in this case, in a startup phase, very simply, that like there are a few phases that you can look at, and this is taken directly, from the biodesign course, which is known as one of the most well-known course, like for biodesign and for medical device innovation, which is one of the course that is taught at Stanford University, which is obviously you may have heard of it already, are one of the like most well taught program, and also one of the most highly innovative university in the world. And the reason why is because they have a very good system that it combines it with their business school and the medical world, and also the clinician. A lot of their fellows and physicians who are in training are actually also I mean, I would say forced, but are encouraged to also try to be involved in some kind of innovation throughout, like through their training, right? And this course is also one of those which is very well related to it, where they can connect multi-specialty doctors and multi-specialty engineers and business people, lawyers, like patent attorneys or anything like that, that may be related to the startup phase, and help kind of nurture you until you can get something out, right? So just a general idea, like if you guys may know, like, if you've been through like the clinical phase already, for atrial fibrillation, there is like a device to help like detect atrial fibrillation in patient who was post-stroke, which is called a SIO patch. That's also one of the devices that was made by Stanford, one of the many, right? And that's actually the picture of the device that's actually on the face of this book. So again, just kind of go over this phase really quick. This is a very famous table. So the phases of the startup itself start in three. There's three phases total in general. So first, just to identify. Second, is the invention phase, and the last one is the implementation phase, which is actually one of the hardest one, right? So the identifying need, this is actually something that is probably the easiest for people who are, clinicians, right? And the reason why is because this is what you do every day, right? You're deep within the problem itself, I mean, you may have hear about like like the other startups, where the user or like the startups, like a founder, they have to go around and figure out, hey, like, is this a problem? They have to do a need analysis, or have to go find out if this is a problem in multiple user or anything like that, because they're not user themselves a lot of time, right? They want to create some kind of solution, but they don't know that well about the problem, right? Or they may, maybe someone who think that, oh, this might be a problem, but we don't know if anyone else has the same problem. This is not a thing for our medtech most of the time. The reason why is because a lot of these problems, if it is identified by people like us, like who are clinicians, who are people who work in the clinical field, I mean, what the problem is. Like, for example, in stroke, the problem is stroke is very debilitating and the treatment doesn't work, right? So now you need to have something better. So in this case, you know, um, clinicians, have, for sure, advantage on this. And again, sometimes, like you may work with biomedical engineer who have some good ideas, but again, they may not know the problem as well as we do. So in this case, this is why it's a good time for like, the biomedical engineer to work with clinicians who are, experts in the field, to help them identify the need. So the first thing is we need to find the need finding. In this case, for stroke, the need finding is that, okay, there's not a lot of good treatment. So now you need to, and the treatment once it's there is too expensive. So that's the kind of need, right? And then you have to actually screen that your need, is it actually something, that is a need for everyone else, right? So pretty much it's kind of like a marketing analysis, right? So in this case, this is this part, just the identification. If you don't have a clear market or you have a clear need, there's no point in moving forward, right? But in this case, like this is something that most clinicians, will already have through their practice or training, because this we're knee deep in trouble all the time, right? Okay, the next phase is like the invention phase. So in this part, so is this where you start generating concept? Okay, so now you know the problem. So how are we going to generate something to help fix that problem? So first thing would be that, okay, so if I go back to the same thing, the question that we had prior, okay, so there's a treatment, like, so stroke is very debilitating. There's a lot of patients with stroke, especially a large stroke that has a large blood clot, cannot be treated very well. There's a new treatment that's arrived, but is fairly effective, but it's fairly new and limited, and also especially limited in terms of pricing. So maybe in this concept generation, you want to design something that is generally more easier to manufacture, use less material, have the same efficacy or even better, and also be much easier to manufacture and cost effective, right? And then once you have designed that concept, you want to screen if that concept is feasible by trying to make a prototype, or like doing any sort of concept screening that you can have, similar to maybe making a minimal viable product. That's a very very famous word that they like to use in startup, to have a minimal viable product to try to kind of test out your concept. If that's the case, then you build upon that and keep building up upon that until you get your final product, right? And eventually moving on to the last phase, once you have something that you already screen concept that, okay, this concept is feasible, it appears to work in the animal, appears to work, in settings. Okay, so then the implementation is when you develop strategy of how do you actually get this out into human, right? So this phase is actually the longest. Sorry, did someone ask anything or? Oh, okay. Never mind. If anyone asks something, just go ahead and interrupt me, okay? But so anyway, so for the implementation phase itself, and this is actually the longest in all the phase, and usually a lot of time, depending on what kind of innovation, in this case, if we're talking about medical device or pharmaceutical, if it's like in a higher class medical device or pharmaceutical, this implementation strategy development phase can be as long as 5 to 10 years. And the reason why is because a lot of time, especially within the higher risk medical device that has never been seen before in the world and has never been used in human before. In this case, you require a very rigorous regulatory pathway, especially with the US FDA, right? And in this case, like the strategy, I wouldn't go in so much detail, but in general, it would be like, okay, what are the steps necessary to try to go through the regulatory hoops to try to prove that this product is actually efficacious, and also meaning that it works well, and also that it's actually safe, right? And the safety is actually, also very important. These two has to go hand in hand. So once you have both, you want to try to kind of prove that. And once that happens, then, that's the time where you launch. And that can be, in a medical device, like I said, can be average up to like 5 years or more if it's a high class medical device, okay? If it's like a lower class medical device, what I'm talking about lower high class is low risk class, right? So a lower risk class, I would say, in general, like, if you're creating sterile gloves, or, you're creating a syringe, a special syringe or anything that doesn't really go into a human body, or you created some software to help identify certain diagnostic or anything that may that may have implication on diagnostic potential, but doesn't really do anything to the patient. In that case, it's a much lower class device, and the validation of that, might be much less. Like for example, if you're creating a syringe, validation is barely nothing, right? So, it's mostly manufacturing validation and make sure that, you're manufacturing something that is, reliable. Okay. Um, so just to kind of move on from that, to build up upon that, like the concept generation, like need finding, concept generation, and also implementation eventually. What happens here is that I'm going to try to show you in kind of phase. So once you have that, how do we actually get it going? Right now, you just ask most people, and what happened is that, especially people in our field, clinician, doesn't matter where you are in the US or in Thailand or anywhere, we have problems of how do we actually get this out there? How do we start even, right? And again, you want to kind of know that general idea of how startups, like, or even like in the medical innovation start first, and so that like, kind of where to move forward from there. In this case, as you can see here, the risk is higher to lower, right? I'm sorry, this graph is a little weird, but yeah, anyway, on the left is the highest risk. Risk in this case mean highest risk for investor, right? Um, the earliest the earlier it is, you have no idea if it's going to work or not, right? And the more you move forward through your development phase, the lower the risk it becomes, right? So in this case, starting from like concept, all the way to, development and being launched, all the way to scaling up to anything like that, the risk becomes lower and lower, right? The earliest stage, which I was talking to you about in the first phase, which is the concept generation and need finding and all those part is actually just the beginning of the first stage, right? And by having all those ready, this is probably the highest risk to even get from concept to actually getting to the minimal viable product that I mentioned to you, which is like the minimal viable product that you can use to validate that if your concept actually works or not, right? In this case, like for example, okay, my company, like I'm talking about, actually my company, which is like called Gravity Medical Technology. That's our company that is a startup that is started, in Silicon Valley and also working with Thailand. And our idea is that we have a need, we found a need, right? That we said that, okay, the need is that a lot of patient has strokes. Strokes is deadly. There is a new treatment in this interventional space, which consists of anything that help remove the blood clot. Problem is these devices are hard to make and also very expensive. So what do we do? So in this case, what we want to do here is that we want to develop something that is more cost effective, more efficacious, and also, not just cost effective, but actually, much easier to manufacture. So that's kind of the need. And then once we design the concept, we need to build a minimal viable product that we can actually build, a efficacious device that is actually uses less, like a manufacturing, ingredient, and also actually being as effective or even more, right? So in this case, that's the concept. To get to the minimal viable product, you're gonna need money, right? To be able to, because some of them, sometimes you can make some stuff yourself. Some of them you have to hire other people to do it, or like a manufacturing, like setup to help you, build your first prototype. In this case, like um, the devices in the neurovascular or in the vascular space, a lot of these like devices are made from a special alloy called nitro, which is like nickel titanium, and these require specialized machine, like for example a laser cutting machine, that is worth like a few $100,000. So again, obviously, you can't afford that. You're gonna have to hire someone to do it, and you're gonna have to get a certain company to help build it out, right? And the same thing. So in this case, for to get money in this phase, it is the highest risk and very unlikely that you're gonna go and find investor randomly and they're just gonna give it to you. In this case, that's why a lot of industry or a lot of academic, like stronghold, like even in Thailand or in the US, like Stanford University, or literally almost every big university in the US now, and a lot of university in Thailand now also have something called an incubator, right? An incubator in this case, what they do is that they want to try to kind of help incubate your idea and try to help you get this concept up and running. and see if it's worth it. But again, also they have to, vet if your need finding and your concept is actually worthy of the money, small amount of money they will give you, so that you can kind of build your minimum viable product, or what we call the MVP. In this case, once you're able to, a lot of the infrastructure right here, this is actually one of the hardest part to get to, because a lot of the people, they fail, right after the need, finding. I mean, they can't generate a good enough concept, or get enough funding to kind of move forward from there. And that's where you kind of hear 99% of the startup fail, and they usually fail very early because they can't really get any traction or any moving, especially the first round of funding. And moving forward, once you start developing on top of your minimal viable product that actually works, right? So in that case, what you want to do is that you want to kind of build upon that, right? Build upon that, like make it, refine it, and eventually make it into your final product by the refinement process. Again, you don't want to move into this point if your minimal viable product doesn't really even try to solve the concept that you have, right? If it doesn't, even miss the target entirely, there's really no point in moving. That's when you kind of go back and think of another concept, right? So as you move on, okay, now this part here is where you get into the development phase, which actually is the most effective, like the most expensive phase in medical technology, right? In other field, I'm not so sure, but again, it's not gonna be as effective as medical device or pharmaceutical. And the reason why is because in this phase, we require regulatory process that most of the time will require some sort of clinical study, especially in high risk device and also pharmaceutical, right? So in this case, this developmental phase, if I were to tell you, like, in general, like sometimes in the US itself, the cost of enrolling one single patient into a study can cost up to 20 to 30 to $40,000 per patient. And if you keep timing that, like for example, you have to generate, and like I know a lot of you already took biostatistic class, and you would know that, okay, to effectively power a study, especially a double arm study, for a medical device, sometimes a lot of time you will need hundreds of patients, right? And think about it. If you have the bare minimum, 100 is that usually too low even for like a double arm study. So 100 patients that cost 40,000 each, and you can time that and see how much it costs, right? And so that's why usually a lot of time medical device, which is higher class, through the US FDA, costs roughly $31 million from start to finish until they can launch into market, and that can take anywhere from 5 years plus. And again, like, I mean, the US FDA regulatory process is, probably the most, like rigorous, and also, I mean, the European CE marks also, getting up there now. I don't want to go into too much detail, but again, the cost of, the enrolling patients, in over there is also expensive, right? So again, like, this is also in a way that because they're set up, like for these, like for patient, and enrollment fees generally more expensive. Moving to other countries, like for example in Thailand or in other parts of the world, the cost per patient might not be anywhere as much as this, but the setup, and how you can kickstart it might not be as fast either, right? So in this case, you have to see. That's why this is one of the important things where emerging markets have a very high, like high potential to kind of build and ramp this up really well. Because again, at the end of the day, in the U.S., they only have 300 million, like population. In Southeast Asia is more than double that, and we have a higher density of patient, within the same territory. So that's why it's very likely, like that we are going to be able to enroll much more patient if we have the same setup. Okay, and kind of moving forward, just to kind of get the idea of where the startup eventually go. What's your end goal? Your end goal in a lot of times, in a financial sense, end goal is pretty much an exit, right? And that's what we call an exit. So the exit scenario normally in a medical device world, there's two ways. One is that they get acquired, meaning that, for example, like the initial stent retriever that I mentioned that was used to treat stroke. I mean, what the first device that was actually out there to treat stroke was designed and created within UCLA. It was a company that was formed, from the UCLA ground. Eventually, got bought, by the company called Stryker, which is one of the top 10 medical device company, in terms of size, in the world, right? And it's also a U.S. company. So they got acquired. So they got bought out, and the people who owns the company eventually, split the money pretty much, right? And then the other way is that the second exit scenario, which is like, desirable, is also the company goes big enough and eventually it goes into initial public offering, which is pretty much, they sell stock to the public, right? And in that case, to give you an example, there's a company which also makes an aspiration catheter, which again, I showed you earlier. There's like a stent retriever and aspiration system which helps to suck out the blood clot. One of the first company to make that is called Penumbra, and they made that starting from startup, as a concept, making a device to help suction out blood clot. Eventually, they move all the way that they've made $100 million in sales per year. The founder is also one of the interventional neuroradiologists, um, in the U.S. And eventually, the company, was growing so fast that eventually they went IPO, and now their stock is in the New York Stock Exchange. In case anyone wants to invest. All right, so let's move on from here. Okay, so this is in general, just to move kind of a little faster here. So in general, like, talking about the earliest from concept stage to the latest, high risk to low risk again, where does the fund come from? Like I said, again, the earliest phase in concept to the company itself, you have something called seed funding, which is like usually the earliest round of funding. And again, like the name can change, depends on how you can call it. It's either seed, Series A, B, C, or just starting at Series A and pre-A or anything. It doesn't matter, right? But in general, the idea is that the seed funding round is usually the initial phase to kind of get the concept out there, your minimal viable product out there, to eventually try to get your company rolling, and then you ramp up from there. So that's it doesn't matter what you call it, but that's the general idea. The earlier it is, the higher the risk is, and the harder it is for you to get money. So the place where they would be willing to bet on a high risk, company are usually incubators, like I mentioned. So incubators are usually they're made to incubate startups like this because they know a lot of people have very good ideas, especially like doctors or engineers or biomed or anyone who works in the field itself. They have good ideas. They may not know very well about how to build a startup, and that's where this incubator comes in. One of them, um, some of the most successful incubator within Silicon Valley, like in Stanford itself, or another incubator called Y Combinator. This is for everything, not just medical devices. We even have incubator in Chulalongkorn University and multiple ones in Thailand. And again, a lot of these incubator, what they do is that they have a lot of expertise, a lot of experts who are, like patent lawyers, who are incorporation lawyers, who are like previous investor, previous founder of a startup, who can help you grow and try to get your concept out there, and try to get your concept proven. And again, they also, a lot of them also come with a small amount of money so that you can kickstart your project to get your minimal viable product. And that's usually what they want to do because they want to kind of build these high risk things, especially within the academic setting. This is a very good part of it because again, majority of the people in the academic setting, they don't know this process, right? Again, I barely knew this process a couple of years ago when I was at UCLA, and I learned all of it literally from scratch, from incubators, from the experience that I had, through it. And again, they don't teach you about this in school about innovation, right? And moving forward from that, you start to have your minimal viable product, the risk profile start to become a little lower, you start to become more lucrative to investor, and that's where you start having larger investor like corporate investor or venture capitalists come in, moving forward on, and then you start growing, and that's when you start raising more money. But I'm not going to go into too much detail Anyway, so just to kind of give you an idea, so give you a case study per se. So Gravity Medical Technology. So this is my company, that we have started with a lot of medical device experts in the U.S. and is a Silicon Valley based. Also currently we also have a branch in Thailand and also in Seattle greater area. And it's a global medical device company. Our goal is that we want to try to create better stroke care for everyone in the world. And our goal is that we want to develop the most effective, but importantly, affordable, stroke treatment to patients worldwide. And the key is that we want it to be very effective, but also extremely affordable. And that's the big key. And that's not an easy task here. So to be able to do that, one of the most important things to get the innovation going is your team, right? Very, very, very unlikely that you can achieve by yourself because there's really no way that you can have all the skills in one person. Is rarely the case, right? So that's one of the thing also is that when you go to an experienced incubator or venture capitalist or anyone who wants to fund you, they may not know too much about the science, but they look first thing, and they may not even know if your product's going to work or not. But one of the first thing that they look at is that what kind of people you have in your team. Is this one of the team that they would imagine if they were to find it? Is it like a team that would be able to accomplish this? And this is probably the most important of all in early stage startup, right? So kind of moving on to there. So this is kind of the team that we built, from scratch. So since because we already have in a lot of people in our group that are medical device expert, have had experience, of actually being part of the development of like the earliest version of any stroke treatment devices out there, right? So that it's a good thing for us because we have this very small circle that we can reach out to all of them. So again, like I mentioned to you, UCLA is the place where they actually design the first, stroke thrombectomy devices. So again, we brought into the team the same group of people. Obviously, they can make one, they can make another one better, right? And and again we employ like people who are like in the largest like for example Barrel Neurological Institute where two of my co-founders are from. So they're actually one of the largest surgical and neuroscience research center in the world. Is located in Arizona, USA. And that's what you need, right? Because you want to be able to validate and test your devices. And like for me himself, like I was one of the assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, which is one of the largest stroke center in the world, and we have the largest volume, and that's where we want to get kind of the clinical idea of how this can go, right? And that's kind of where my expertise come in. I'm also a public health expert, so finding the need itself, knowing the need, knowing the quantity of need, and actually performing the procedure itself, is something that I can do. And also like my specialty when I had training, especially when I mentioned about stem cell, is that I am like an animal model expert. So I know like how to use these devices and try to test them in the animal model before it actually goes into an animal, a human, right? So in this case, as you can see here, like we form a team of multi-specialty, not just doctors itself, but engineer, medical device expert, and not just medical device expert itself, you know, it is like in a specific field expert, like animal trial expert, clinical trial expert, medical device testing, bench testing expert, everything like this. As you can see here, so we're trying to build a dream team here, right? And that's some of the thing where the investor looks at, right? The first thing, if they don't know anything about your technology, they just look at the team. If they think that you can accomplish this or not, and that's it, right? Because at the end of the day, I already mentioned, early stage startup, the risk is high. Everything you're selling, a lot of time, I mean, they may be just a dream, right? But they want to see if the team is someone that can probably make that dream a reality. And if it looks like you have a big dream, but the team doesn't look like they can accomplish that, it's not going to work most of the time in terms of funding. I mean, you may be able to do it, and but again, unless you can show that in your team, the investors who are savvy are not going to fund you, right? Okay, so kind of moving forward, just kind of show you a little bit about our proprietary devices. So we actually eventually designed a stent retriever and an aspiration system, which with our own new patent, which is actually designed to be the most simplistic, use the least amount of nitinol, which is like I mentioned to you, an expensive material, and also like the more complicated the design is, the more cost it costs to make. So now we're trying to make it very effective, but also like the most easiest to make and also cost effective, right? So in this case, we have successfully designed, mechanical thrombectomy devices, which is much more cost effective, and the efficacy that is tested in a bench model is actually at least on par or better than all the leading market, in the US, right? Okay, so but again, like I said, like, I mean, eventually it needs to be proven in a real clinical setting, right? So just full disclosure. So okay, so anyway, just to kind of move forward from there, so now you kind of know the case study of where we are. So now we're moving towards a little bit in the final stretch here, so in the emerging market itself, and how the medical technology startup, industry is. And when I'm talking about emerging market, obviously, like right now, Southeast Asia, is an emerging market, and we have a lot of population, in need of these, innovation. And how does medical innovation play a role, in our market, especially in the Southeast Asian market, right? And again, there's going to be a lot of things that is needed in the U.S. Which is similar to us, but there's going to be a lot of things that is needed in the emerging market that is not the same as in the U.S. Like for example, right now, if the U.S. they can reimburse, very easily 15,000 worth of products, to use for a stroke, or 500,000 baht. Having a cheaper devices doesn't really necessarily mean more patients will be treated, if that makes sense, because they're already reimbursing all of it. It doesn't really change anything. It may change some, but it may not make a lot of impact. So in that case, this innovation isn't really important for the U.S. population. Probably not. Low likelihood. But in this case, is it very important for an emerging market? Yes. So in this case, that's why we got to kind of look more into our field itself, because again, we want to try to work in our, in our own market. Hopefully in the future, anyone who's hopefully listening today, we want to eventually jump into this at some point, right? So okay, so there are actually more roadblocks in emerging markets, including Thailand, than actually the mature markets. So kind of going through the mature markets really quick. So the mature market, they also have roadblocks, right? But the emerging market has more roadblocks. Let's say that, right? So mature market, what kind of roadblocks? So the cost of product design development, I already told you, a lot of companies they have to use up to $31 million to actually get products, approved, right? And both of them, right? So as you can see here, cost and the regulation, itself can cost up to $31 million, and also a very rigorous, long process, 5 to 10 years, you know, and again to be able to get the product, in a good quality, manner, it's always going to be a problem for anyone, right? Because again, this is like a medical device, that is very high risk, and it goes into your brain, right? So really, you don't want, and you want to foolproof like everything possible, and you want to make sure the quality is the utmost standard. So there's not going to be a lot of places, not even in the U.S., where they can manufacture, like the best quality, medical device, and they tend to be a very few places that can do that. So then, those are the places where you eventually have to go. But still, this is going to be some of the issue with the mature markets still. But for emerging markets, we have all the problem here, and we add a few other things. So the thing is that we also lack local expertise. And when I'm talking about expertise here, I'm not talking about, so let's say, for example, similar into like gravity medical technology, we're working on stroke itself. People who have expertise in stroke, there's a lot, right? But people who have expertise in stroke devices, thrombectomy, nitinol, animal model, clinical trials, again, as you can see here, it's not just simple expertise anymore. It's almost like a super expertise, super specialized in a way. And there's only a few of those in the world even. How are you going to find that all in Thailand? It's nearly impossible, right? Or even in Southeast Asia in general. How are you going to find everyone who fits all that criteria, right? It's very hard. So that's why, it's a lot more problem, in the emerging markets. The good thing is that, even the U.S. is hard. but again, at least the US, they have a lot of places where, they're known for, like, for example, UCLA is known for testing and developing new medical devices. Like University of Miami is known for, like doing animal models, like clinical trials known for University of Pittsburgh, right? Something like that. At least, there's a lot of places that you can combine because the US is big, right? Infrastructure itself, to help support startups, or, medical device development is also not as well developed as in the US. Again, like I said, in the US, they have a lot of places where if you want to start something and you have the money right now, like there's a lot of places that can do it, right? But again, if you have a lot of money and you have you want to do it right now in Thailand, and there's not a lot of places that can do no product prototyping for you, do animal trials, do clinical trials, not a lot, right? So this infrastructure is something that requires to be like built up more, and the funding support again, this is something that I don't want to take lightly. It's not like we don't have funding support, but again, the funding support in the medical device world is actually not that. It's not that common right now. But again, it's growing really rapidly. So again, this might be something of a double-sided thing, right? Because right now, because there's not a lot of support, like sorry, I mean there's not a lot of support, but there are some. It's emerging, and there's also not a lot of medical device new innovation in Thailand. It means that a lot of these support that are coming up, you don't have a lot of competition. So it means that it's similar to the early age of startups in the US where they have a lot of money coming up, but they don't have a lot of companies, right? So then it means that there's very likelihood that you're going to get funded in a larger amount is much higher. So in this case, this actually might be the golden time, for Thailand, right? Because a lot of these funding are actually emerging. Okay, so how do we fix that? So the thing is that because Gravity, and our, like our company is actually trying to work in these emerging markets and try to make sure that we have all these patients treated. So how do we go around all these barriers? And going all around these barriers, meaning all these 6 barriers, right? So the most important thing, as I can see here, is the even like is what we think is that you have to partner with the world, right? And that's one of the most important thing. Even though you are in the emerging market, doesn't mean you are the only one solo. You don't have to do every single thing in Thailand, right? The best thing is that you want to partner, but now you want to partner globally, right? There's people who are animal experts, in University of Miami, you do that, right? And that's what we're doing. Like there are bench testing experts in UCLA, you do that, right? You have these connections, but then that the clinical trial experts, even though let's say University of Pittsburgh has a lot of patients, but in Thailand right now, Thammasat University and Chulalongkorn University, they actually likely to have even more patients in the next coming year. So in this case, like we know that it means that the clinical study partnership, and that's one of the reasons why we're partnered with Chulalongkorn University. Very likely, we're working on partnering with Thammasat University right now to get like the first earliest the earliest post-marketing testing like trial like at Thammasat University registry. And again, because we know Thammasat University has um, a high chance of having a lot of patients, even more catchment area. That's what we call it, meaning that an area where you're catching the patient into your hospital system is as it's almost 10 times larger than Pittsburgh, right? So it means that very well that Thammasat University will have a lot more patients, right? In this case, it will be a very good clinical study partnership, but you're going to have to leverage that, especially if you have a global, partnership, right? And, so that's just general idea, the first thing that you can overcome a lot of these barriers already, especially in these local expertise and even the cost, right? Is you need to have a global network of experts to work with, right? And moving on to this slide, this is one of the last slide I kind of want to show you really quick, is that one of the things that every startup and also every fund, every investor wants to look at, and they love these slides, right? Unfair advantage, right? Unfair advantage basically, you're thinking, okay, why is that? Like, why is it unfair? You want to try to be fair, right? It's not true in the startup world, and there's a reason why. Because sometimes you want the person or the team to make something that you think is world changing or impactful, to be from a team that you deem is not fair, right? Because if everyone has a fair chance of doing it and any team can do it, there's really no point, right? Because they don't know why they're going to invest in you over someone else, right? But now you want a team that's actually, it's like a cheating, right? Just imagine you're playing a video game, you're cheating, and you have like level 100 everyone, right? And everyone else is like level 1, right? That's kind of what you want. That's what everyone wants to see, right? So what you want to build is that the team that you want to build, you want to build with the best people. You want the best team possible, who is the best in their individual field. You want the most experienced, engineer, physician, clinical trial, strategic investor, or anything like that. And these are something that can prove you unfair compared to any other companies, right? And I'm talking about international and local because that's what they want to look at. Because a lot of time, like these funding, like I told you, it keeps accumulating, right? And if it takes $31 million to develop a company that, develop one device that is US FDA approved towards market, that's a lot of money, right? So they're not going to bet money on someone that they don't think can achieve their goal, right? I mean, again, that's why building the team is one of the most important things. But not only that, you have to build a network, right? And one of the network is that because in the medical device field itself, like doctors and these are the people who are your customer, and they're the one who will validate you in the first place if this is something that you should want, right? And again, even though like they might not be in your team, but this is a network that is very important to use, right? Either doctors, hospital, like any other stakeholders that may be important, right? And then lastly, and this is something that may not happen in every field, but like for example, for us, we have exclusive access to like advanced technology that no one else can have. Like for example, if you are, at a certain university and that you have developed a certain way, like for example computerized, like in this case, I'm talking, I'm making a real life example, like for example, like the University of Milan, and Amsterdam that we're partnered with, they're one of the only place in the world that is using computational biology similar to the space rocket testing to use to test stents, even before it's developed, to see if how well it will work, in a computer setting, and they can make 1,000 different, variation of these things at the same, in a fraction of time, rather than you just manually doing it and testing one by one. You do this and you find the best configuration, and then you actually make it, right? In this case, like these are some of the advanced developmental technology. If you have partnered with them and you are the one who has exclusive access to that because of the patent or whatever in that case, then it is unfair, right? Again, this is one of the things where, medical innovation is important, that you have these, unfair advantage. Okay, kind of move on here. So as you can see, a lot of people are already thinking, okay, so this sounds like very difficult, right? But it actually, it is difficult and challenging in a way, but there are solutions, right? And that's why, we also have to look on the bright side on what we have, especially in the emerging countries, especially with Thailand. We do have a lot of funding coming up. We do have a lot of clinical, numbers that we can leverage. But again, we may not have, a lot of like medical device specific related super specialists, right? But that's why we want to overcome this with additional collaboration, like what CICM or Thammasat University is collaborating with, Gravity, with Barrow Neurological Institute, with these things, so that we can help pave, your way to that, and obviously, I heard that, we are also going to try to, get medical student to be rotating, over at either in the US, either one of our centers soon. So hopefully, like we can even have more collaboration with them. So okay, just moving on. So just to see, so this is how eventually it came out, to real life. Everything I told you about, like this is we're testing our own device in a model, like which is like a bench testing model. It's tested um, at the Barrow Neurological Institute. We removed like a very tough blood clot from a silicone model, and as you can see here, just pull it out like this, and this is how you start validating. You know, and other forms of validation would be like animal trial. And again, since because sometimes if the device is something new that has not never been seen before in the world, you may need to like do a large scale human trial as well. But if it's something that is similar to other ones in the product using for the same use cause, you may not need it, depending on what regulatory body you're going with, right? Okay, so just kind of go like at our last thing here. So okay, and just to kind of give you an overview, like you were talking about like the exit strategy, right? So a lot of the company within our field, like and these are some of the companies, within the neurovascular space that got acquired. So they got bought out pretty much. We still talk about it then. So like these two companies, they make devices for treatment of neurovascular diseases. They sold for, as you see here, like $380 million. This one sold for like 1.2 billion. And this is a Penumbra, which is like the company which makes the aspiration catheter, for the brain. Now they're IPO, so they're worth like 5 to 6 billion, I think. Yeah. Okay, so the key message here. All right, so don't get discouraged yet. Okay, so the last key message here, like I said, we're at like a turning point here. Innovation is becoming much easier to grasp, especially within the connected world nowadays. With the current partnership with us, with everyone else in the, like globally, Thammasat University with the U.S., Chulalongkorn University, international, national university connecting together, like industry, this is the best time than ever to do this. And like I said, like in the past, cardiology, in the cardiology field, they were able to do this without any of this. They didn't even have internet at that time. They developed extents, but it took a long time. But now it should be even much sooner because these innovation can move much, much, much faster. So again, like I see, in general, this is like the last key message I just want to send out. So medical technology, especially in the medical device world, like is lucrative. It's very lucrative. As you can see here, lucrative in every way in terms of impact and also money, right? I mean, like you see how much they get acquired, right? But and it's also very impactful to patient. It's very sustainable and but it's very challenging, as you can see. So again, having a super specialization expert, in your team is a big key here. And how do you do that? Because a lot of times you can say, okay, can't find anyone here. That's why we need global partnership. That's why, we need to go through the university to connect with other academic centers to find out who are the experts and how do we connect with them, open the doors to them, right? Having the partnership is very essential. Leveraging these partnership can help overcome a lot of the infrastructure issue. Like for example, you can't do animal trial here because it's being set up. It's not going to be for a while. Maybe in the next couple of years, Thammasat University and Chulalongkorn University will both have, let's say, a large animal lab that can test our device. We can't test this in rats, right? Because it's too big, right? We have to test in large animal like in pigs or in dogs, right? In this case, we can't set it up now. So how? You just partner with the U.S. There's a lot of dog lab that if you have the money, you can book something in 2 weeks, right? So that's the thing. So partnership is a key essential here. But now you can see here, using clinical trial in the US, if it costs you $40,000 per patient, you can probably do it much, much, much less here, right? Because again, the reimbursement process and the payment fee process here is much, much different. So we got to leverage that. And the last thing is that, as you can see, the roadblock in emerging markets, as I mentioned to you, there are major roadblock exclusively to emerging market, like the local expertise, infrastructure, and weak economy, but again, like the funding and everything else, like I said, is improving. So that's why eventually you want to move on to how do you fix it by the partnership, by leveraging the funding you have, by leveraging the strong point that we have, especially in our clinical volume. And then, and also our clinical expertise, our physician, our clinician, because of the clinical volume, are very, very skilled, right? So in that case, we have to leverage it. Like for example, again, I keep talking good things about Stanford, but don't forget Stanford is one of the hospitals where they do the least amount of stroke treatment in the US. Compared to Thailand, there's much, much less. Why? Because Stanford is in Palo Alto, right? And in Palo Alto is like all startups, all Google, Facebook, and everything else, within that region. And they're all people in their 30s. No one's going to have a stroke, right? Everyone's healthy, right? And they all, like, a lot of them, are actually eating extremely healthy. So they don't get strokes or cardiovascular disease or anything. So where are they going to get patients, right? So that's why even there they have a problem, right? And so now you can see here we have our own, set of pros. So now we gotta leverage it, and we can even partner with them. So now I can see very easily that you can partner with Stanford and offer them, clinical trial, services to help them, get the patient that they don't have, right? Okay. Anyway, so that's just a general idea. I think we're done here. Yeah, I'm open to any questions you may have, and hopefully it helps, ignite the fire in some people. Thank you so much.
No. So, I want to thank Dr. Kunakor for the lecture. I think it actually touches upon a lot of stuff that, like he said, we don't learn in medical school, and I think it merges a lot of other fields that we don't talk about, like business and product development and engineering, and even epidemiology. And also, what is interesting is that, um, like like you said, when I was a resident, so when I was an intern was probably 2008, and I as a ENT we had to do neurosurgery. So neurosurgery was probably the only exposure I have to stroke. I think at that point in time, this was not. I don't did not have didn't know that that wasn't existed back then. So it's interesting to see how things have developed and how they have advanced. Um, all I remember back then was, even when I was in medical school, I think that stroke was like people were developing like fast tracks, more so like how to respond to stroke patients in the emergency room, as opposed to even like innovation on how to move a clot. I remember things like TPA, maybe, if that's what they use. One question I did have is you talk about incubators a lot. So you did start at an incubator?
So actually, we did not. Like the reason why is because, because usually, so there are some drawbacks about incubator as well, that I didn't mention. I mean, there's a lot of good side, especially because they provide you with a lot of support, right? The thing is that a lot of the incubator support, the reason they provide support, they want something in return, right? So a lot of time they provide you a lot of support, including a startup money, but they also want to, want a certain percent of your company, it depends on where, So like for example, Y Combinator, they will give you a startup funding of I think 150,000 for 7.5% of the company. And usually, again, in that case, for most startup, it's actually extremely useful. For some of the startup, that if you already have those support, or you already have some of those expertise or connections, and if you can think you can find money, and a lot of time this may happen within our field, you may not need that, right? Because sometimes, again, at the end of the day, your idea for raising money is that you want to raise the least amount possible, and you want to raise it, at a time to try to dilute the percentage of your company as little as possible. In a financial aspect, that's what every investor would want, because they want eventually to get the most bang for their bucks, pretty much, right? So in this case, that's why, we didn't end up starting with incubator. I had other startups that I have already completed out from, that came from incubators, and they're usually very useful, especially in, in academic setting, because there's really not a lot of way that you can have any exposure. But again, I mean, there's not that many university in the U.S. that has, very, very successful track record, like, incubator, maybe like Stanford and UCSF, which is in, or Berkeley, which is within the Silicon Valley area. Everywhere else is also trying to kind of move up on this. So I think that's why, when I see the incubator in Thailand, up and coming, and I know that, that the funding is also, pretty much on par with a lot of incubator in the US where, they may start you off with like $25,000 or, $10,000 or something like that, and I got, again, they have some expertise to provide, we also have some expertise to provide. So I think like this is really a good time, for us if we want to start anything. I think one of the things that we can move forward is that hopefully, once we start having a lot, a few more that, like medical device, related, incubator within, academic settings or in an industry setting within our region, I think at least we can have some kind of, like a resource to kind of, reach, tap into that, that would be great. But again, there are the only minuses I can see here most of the time is that, the support is usually free. It comes with it as like a package, but eventually at the end of the day, you want to see if it's financially makes sense.
And usually, if say it's an incubator associated with university, I would assume that they would get some. They would, if it was successful, they would take part of the. They would be a part of the patent.
Oh, so let me just touch on the patent part really quickly. So again, so when I talk about like the actual patent itself, so most of the time, like I'm not sure about in Thailand, but in the US, um if you are like a full-time, like worker, like within an academic setting, either as a professor or medical student, and again, um I think this can be answered with an extremely short story. Sorry, let me take 1 minute of your time. So again, I did have a medical student, when I was at UCLA, like who was training with me, I was, one of his, mentor, and I was teaching him, in stroke, right? He was rounding, and again, like he was one of the, he was like a third year medical student, right? And this third year medical student, at that point, I later found out that, and he was actually the one who got me into like the medical innovation field in the first place because he's actually, one of the founders of a company called Verge Genomics. And Verge Genomics is one of the first company that is developing, and it's in trial now, an ALS drugs. Like for medical students who may or may not be familiar with it yet. Like, so it's like amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which is pretty much, like Lou Gehrig's disease or the disease that we said is untreatable right now, neurodegenerative disease, which cause upper and lower motor neuron like degeneration. So this company now is worth about $500 million, and it was started by my medical student, right? And when I saw him, it was already a successful company, so it means that he actually started it a few years before that. So it means that he started it when he was doing his PhD and doing his MD PhD, just starting. He barely has even any clinical background, right? So as you can see here, like if the resource setting fits, at the end of the day, at that point, to answer your question about the patent itself, because he is an academic students, and so technically all academic, like personnel who are, technically hired by the hospital, all their patents belong to the hospital, right? Depending on where, but most academic centers are like that. They keep all the patents, they own it, but the inventor is the one who invented it. But then they give you the right to go do whatever you want with it, or what, depending on how you negotiate with. Sometimes if it's like a medical device, like for example, like a device is, like in this case at UCLA where they made the first generation thrombectomy system, UCLA owned the patent, but the inventor is one of my mentor. And the inventor, eventually was able to, work with UCLA. They were able to get the licensing deal. UCLA owned a part of it and of the company, and eventually when they sold the company, UCLA got a part of it, right? But again, it doesn't mean that they just take your patent. You're technically their employee, so your intellectual property, in certain company belongs to them. In a sense, that's kind of fair, but they also help you secure the patent in the first place, right? So they a lot of time the cost for getting a very complicated U.S. patent for medical devices can cost upward to $50,000 or even more, right? So in that case, they cover the whole cost. and they cover the whole process of doing it. You don't have to do anything, right? So in that case, in one way, it's worth it. But on the other way, like in some people, like if they are, really highly successful, like an entrepreneur who is mostly doing, innovation and and making patents, designing devices. Sometimes, like they may want to be, like in a non-academic setting, like where, they're at free reign to do whatever they want, and again, they're also not bound by, like the full clinical, the full clinical load that is bound with the full time too. So sometimes, like, when you are a part-time employee, that doesn't happen with you. Yeah. So yes. So that's a short story to that. Yes. Like if you own the patent, like, with that student, he had the patent that's owned by UCLA. Eventually, you have to pay back UCLA some point. And most academic centers are like that.
Thank you. I don't know if there's any other questions from other students. I don't know อาจารย์ต้อมยังอยู่เปล่า We also have, one of our old faculty members that I think joined our meeting as well. If
Yeah, might be super late for her.
oh, it may be super late for her.
Yeah, because she's on the Eastern time, so
Oh,
I'm
she's on the
assuming
East
it's
Coast.
5 a.m. Yeah.
So, but again, Dr. Kunakon, we want to thank you again for I think it was very helpful. Yeah, and, again, like I said, it's something that seems very, innovative and, that has changed how medicine is done. And I think our students really got a lot from your lecture. So we want to thank you again and for giving us the time and staying up extra late in the West Coast over there for us. So thank you again.
Yep. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
ครับ So if that's it, thank you again, and hopefully we'll get to talk to you pretty soon sometime, and hopefully see you next time soon.
Yes, definitely. Hopefully we can collaborate more, with the CICM and also Thammasat University.
Yes. So thank you.
Thank you.
ขอบคุณครับ
ครับ
สวัสดีครับ